Welcome everyone to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. Today we are going to continue the conversation about humanitarian aid for Gaza. For more than a year of this war, Israel was sending in humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. More than 1.7 million tons of aid reached Hamas and the civilians within the Gaza Strip. More than 91,000 trucks and more than 10,000 pallets of aid. That aid was provided by Israel, by Egypt, by Jordan, by the international community. It made its way to Gaza primarily by land, but also by air and by sea. Now, a couple of months ago, Israel said enough is enough. How can we fight a war while we are supplying our enemy? Because keep in mind, much of that aid was being seized by Hamas, not given to the civilians, and rather used as leverage over the civilian population and to quite literally fuel the war effort of Hamas. So Israel stopped all that, but now just yesterday has resumed the aid into Gaza, largely due to international pressure. Many people in Israel are up in arms over this. We are still at war. Hamas still has a grip on the Gaza Strip. And there are many civilians within Gaza who seem to be either actually or ideologically siding with Hamas. Why should we be supplying our enemy with aid, with equipment, with supplies to continue this war? But the other side of the equation is there are civilians suffering in Gaza. We don't want a humanitarian crisis. We want to remove Hamas. We want to end this war and continue our lives. Maybe humanitarian aid is the means by which that gets us to that final destination and makes sure that there is no famine or humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We need to discuss this issue. And joining me today is an expert on many issues of this war, Atar Porat, who is a member of the IDSF research team. We're going to explore some issues like, is there actually a famine in Gaza? What does the data actually suggest? How will the humanitarian aid be distributed? And the groups in Israel who are against the distribution of humanitarian aid, are they rightfully designated as violent extremist groups by the US State Department? And should they continue to be sanctioned entities by the US because they want to restrict aid going into Gaza and getting into the hands of Hamas? All of this and more with Atar Porat from the IDSF Research Department. Atar, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. We have a lot to discuss, and we're really going to hone in on this whole issue of the humanitarian aid. And people are very divided on this topic here in Israel. Before we begin, just if you can introduce yourself to all of our viewers.
Hi everyone, my name is Atar. I work at the research department at the IDSF. I write the weekly Israel security briefing about the war, and I do ad hoc studies, which we will link in the future once they come out. And other than that, I'm finishing my master's degree in data science at the Hebrew University.
Wonderful. So let's really cut to the chase. Humanitarian aid restarting now from Israel to Gaza. Good thing or bad thing?
I think it's a bit more nuanced than this. Rather than a binary option, I think I'll just present the two main narratives, and then I'll plug in my take on it. So obviously, there is a big danger of starvation, which would not be good for Israel worldwide, and also Israel does not intend on causing any civilian deaths. On the other hand, some of the aid is stolen by Hamas, diverted for its war machine. Hamas taxes the humanitarian aid, and that's how they fund themselves. So I think what Israel should have done at the beginning of the war is what they're trying to do right now: control the aid so it gets to the people and Hamas doesn't get some of it. Up till now, the aid organizations that have been delivering it, the aid has been coming through the crossings by coordination of COGAT, the Israeli coordinator for humanitarian aid, and that aid has been distributed by the local aid organizations, if it's UNRWA, UNICEF, OCHA, World Food Program, all UN bodies, and also local bodies like the Red Crescent. But who are the people running those aid organizations? Most of them are Gazans, and Gazans are under the sovereignty of Hamas. So you can't trust that that all the aid is getting to the people that need them the most. And what actually happens is that Hamas steals it from the warehouses, even if there are Gazans that are not affiliated with Hamas. Hamas is the one who actually has the grips on power. So any mechanism that involves the local humanitarian organizations and the local mechanisms that have existed would necessarily include Hamas. So what Israel has been trying to do, together with the U.S. and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, is create a new body, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And the entire idea is to have American contractors, two companies that have been contacted so far, UG Solutions and SRS. Both of them are very new companies, by the way. I tried to look up, like on the Crunchbase, see when they're incorporated. So one of them, SRS, was incorporated half a year ago, and UG Solutions has been incorporated in 2023. I think SRS is by a former CIA chief. And the idea is that the American contractors would be the ones who deliver the food. Obviously, there's been a lot of criticisms and gushings about the GHF, mainly by actors who wanted to keep the Hamas link to the humanitarian aid. And the main problem that Israel has faced so far is that it cannot play chicken with Hamas on humanitarian aid. Israel is going to face much more pressure than Hamas. Hamas would be happy to sacrifice its own people. And if you play chicken, Hamas would win in the long run. I mean, we just saw yesterday that we had Canada, UK, and France issuing a joint statement threatening Israel with sanctions. And I think that's why it's so important to create this new mechanism where you can get the aid to people which are not combatants and are not Hamas people, and they'd be vetted. And on the other hand, you'd prevent Hamas from getting the aid. So this way, you achieve both goals, and you prevent Hamas from basically getting more funds. And on the other hand, you take care of the civilian population.
Now, let me ask you a question. The impetus for restarting all of this aid right now is because Israel made a policy decision a few months back to cease sending aid, allowing aid to cross into Gaza. And now there is an outcry that there is a famine in Gaza. The civilians are starving. Are you able to comment on the veracity of that? Is it true? Meaning, obviously, if there's no aid to the civilians, they don't have enough significant, adequate, and abundance of food and water. That's a problem. But are we actually at the levels of famine right now?
So you have to remember that before the current halting of humanitarian aid, which started about 2 months ago, there was a lot of humanitarian aid coming into Gaza. The IDF and COGAT calculated that it should stay for months. Right now, IDF officials are saying that there's still a few weeks left of food, according to their calculation. With regard to the famine claim, you have to remember that we had this famine claim many, many times in the past, and if it was true in the past, then I guess all the Gazans should have died a long time ago. But this hasn't happened because, as we saw, the IPC, which concluded in the past that there is an imminent famine, later on we found out that their methods were flawed, very biased, and included basically interviews and people on the ground. So it's not a very good way to scientifically test it, and you have to remember the entire context of the propaganda war. So I don't take these claims at face value. But on the other hand, you do want aid to get to the people, and Hamas knows that all the images that are seen across the West of children coming together for food, even if some of it is fake, it works on people, and it's not in Israel's interest to have those images. And then this creates international pressure on Israel. So I cannot assess the veracity of the claims of famines. From past experience, we know that they were very biased, and we know that Israel is keeping track of it, because you've got the jurists in the Israeli military who are adamant to get more food in. And they're also, some of them are putting a lot of hurdles with this new initiative, especially the Advocate General in the IDF, which is another issue in of itself.
Now, there are those who are concerned that there are still Israeli hostages in Gaza. And if there's not enough food and water in Gaza, that will directly impact the welfare of the Israeli hostages in Gaza. So there are really two implications of a famine, so to speak, in Gaza. One is the Gazan civilians, the other is the Israeli civilians. What would you respond to that concern?
I just don't buy this argument, because even when there was a lot of aid in Gaza, you saw all the hostages coming out saying that Hamas tortured them and still didn't give them a lot of food. And before they needed to be released, Hamas basically stuffed them with food so they would look a bit healthier after they saw the images of there was this one particular disturbing scene when it was Eli Sharabi and the other hostage, the father of the three girls, I forgot his name, Oded, where they were very emaciated, and this was a very bad look for Hamas. They look like Holocaust survivors, and Hamas is very attentive to global trends and in the propaganda war, so it decided to stuff the hostages with more food so they look healthier, even if they've been starved for over a year and a half. So I think it's completely irrelevant, the amount of food, because Hamas, first of all, gets the food for its fighters, its terrorist infrastructure, before it gets to the civilians. So I don't buy this claim that if there is less food, the hostages would get less food, because they get less food anyways based on the whims of the terrorists.
Right. And by very definition, if Israel is going to bring in aid and give it to only the civilians and not Hamas, then by definition, that aid wouldn't make its way to the Israeli hostages any more than previous food, because it's not being given to Hamas.
You have to remember that, first of all, with the current aid mechanism, it still hasn't been set up, and there's still a lot of pressures to keep the current mechanisms, including from the Trump administration. Some of the American contractors already landed in Israel and have said that it's going to be operational minimum May 24th, May 25th. And there's still a lot of criticisms within the Israeli government that some of that aid is going to get to Hamas, and also Hamas still hoarded months of the aid. And also the American administrator, Jake Wood, I believe is his name, he admitted that it's an imperfect plan. So I still think that anyways, a lot of it will get to Hamas, no matter what you do. I think the main impetus that the Israeli government has to convince the world is to create a credible mechanism which would take the levers away from Hamas to control the population using aid, make sure the population gets the aid and is concentrated in one place where the people coming to get the aid are vetted to make sure they're not Hamas terrorists. So with regard to the hostages, I think that Hamas could give them more food. I mean, you had many hostages that came out. Even when they were hostages, some of the aid has been stopped, and still they said that Hamas terrorists that kept them had huge meals, and they were taunting them, not giving them any more food. So I think this is a lot of the Hamas propaganda is also directed at Israelis, saying this: you don't give us food, the hostages won't get food. And I think it's a very, very cynical and very disgusting trope that Hamas uses to manipulate people in Israel in order to sign an agreement that would basically allow Hamas to stay in power, supposedly with Hamas releasing some of the hostages.
Now, the plan right now is for these U.S. companies to be really at the point of distributing the aid to the civilians within Gaza. And that kind of makes it seem like the IDF and Israel has a hands-off approach. Not our problem. Let the U.S. company deal with this. But maybe you can describe for us a little better what the facts on the ground are, because presumably the IDF, it needs to be intimately involved operationally to make sure the environment is conducive to these U.S. companies to operate.
So currently, the arrangement that has been published and discussed, including yesterday by the spokesperson for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, the idea is the IDF is going to take care of the perimeter of the distribution sites, but the entire distribution mechanism is going to be by the American contractors. I think that the separation is due to two main reasons. First of all, in the Israeli political arena, it's considered very contentious for IDF soldiers to give the aid. The main line that has been said in the Israeli press is that the IDF shouldn't be directly involved in giving the aid to the enemy civilians, or usually more from like left-leaning circles, that it's resembling an occupation. And that means that they don't want to send the soldiers to do civilian work. So it's been kind of a hot potato that the Israeli government has been dealing with the idea that the IDF directly has to give the aid. And I think the other reason is because operationally it would be easier for the IDF not to be involved. Because imagine if some of the terrorists come, right, and then the IDF has to react. It would be a very bad look for the IDF. I mean, it doesn't matter if soldiers act in self-defense, and this happened in the past. What was so-called dubbed the Flower Massacre, I think it was like a year ago, when it was it's a blood libel that basically said the IDF killed people trying to look for flour, when you had Hamas terrorists coming charging towards IDF soldiers, and they had to react. So I think they're trying to create this separation. And also I think there is also a lot of pressure from perhaps Arab countries or on the Trump administration that the IDF shouldn't be the one directly giving the aid. So that's another possibility. All of it is speculation. I'm just giving some ideas to what might be the reason. But also there are other very difficult complications with the American contractors. In the past, when you had the Fallujah campaign in Iraq, you had terrorists who killed American contractors and hung them. So imagine what this would do to the Trump administration when it's pursuing the MAGA agenda of America First, when it would have to explain to the American public how some American contractors have been killed by Hamas. Or another incident in 2007 when Blackwater contractors basically killed some civilians. Some of them acted, I guess, in similar tactics to Hamas when insurgents dressed up as civilians. Some of them were court-martialed. Trump later pardoned them. But this also creates a further complication for the American administration. I mean, what is going to happen when Hamas is going to shoot at those people? Because this is not going to be very sterile environment. Hamas is going to make it as difficult as possible to create this separation between combatants and civilians. And Hamas has no it won't stop itself from using civilians as human shields and aid as a weapon. And the blame will go to Israel. And that's their strategy all along, playing chicken with Israel on humanitarian aid and counting on the world to come for Israel, which is what we see happening.
There's a organization here in Israel called Tzav Tesha, and they have been sanctioned by the U.S., and they've been designated as a violent extremist group. And if you recall, they were involved in trying to block some of that humanitarian aid entering into Gaza in the more earlier stages of the war. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this group, other groups like them. Do you think that it makes sense that the U.S. State Department sanctioned them? Do you think that they're reflective of the sentiments within Israeli society?
I think the sentiment that they're expressing is, basically, as long as we have hostages, it doesn't make sense that Israel is providing the enemy with aid. And I think there has been a huge double standard in the supposed application of international humanitarian law with regards to this war. I mean, people are always citing the Geneva Convention or the 46th article of the Geneva Convention, but they always tend to forget the 24th article, which says that siege is legal. I mean, it's how most wars have been fought. And I think no war, in no war in history, has one side like Israel been demanded to take care of all the humanitarian needs of the combatant, especially when the combatant is using the humanitarian aid as as a weapon of war. And this politicization of humanitarian law is another front in the war that Israel is waging. So many jurists have invented ridiculous double standards with regards to the delivery of aid. And I understand why many Israelis are very upset about this. When you've got hostages that are treated like basically like animals, some of them are kept in cages, don't get anything to eat, are beaten, abused, sexually abused. You see all the testimonies, and yet Israel is providing aid. So I think it's very understandable. I don't think it's very wise, because there are civilians, and Israel is a nation that does follow international law and is humanitarian at its heart. It's a Jewish nation, so it also understands that it needs to provide the humanitarian assistance to the civilians, which is more difficult when Hamas is intentionally trying to hurt its own civilians as a facet of its propaganda war against Israel. So Israel, in a sense, has to take care of its hostages, and also the hostages by the situation that has been created, which are the Gaza civilians, which are basically Hamas hostages that are being used as pawns in Hamas's information war against Israel.
And in 2023, the UN put out a report that I think there's about 66 million people in the Arab world who are suffering from starvation. And it doesn't seem like the world really is all too worried about those 66 million Arabs in the Middle East. They're mostly focused on the Arabs living in Gaza. Is there a double standard there?
I saw a meme recently where it showed the world in different colors, and it showed like everything that's like south of the Sahara. If like there's a terrorist attack, no one cares, no one knows. If there is something in like the Western world, it's all vigils, and everyone come together. If it's Asia, not we don't care so much. But if it's the Middle East, it's if it's Israel, then it's news all day. Of course, I mean, no one cares. All those people, all those humanitarian people, they don't seem to care too much about what's happening in Sudan or in Yemen. It's the usual trope, which has been, I guess, said so many times on this show and other place: no Jews, no news. All those UN reports about Israel are written by activists turned jurists turned lawyers and turned so-called humanitarian specialists, and it's masquerading behind credentialism in order to push a very anti-Western, anti-Israel agenda under the auspices of humanitarianism. I think that's why it's so vile to use the language of human rights in order to attack the country that is actually trying to maintain the highest standard of military combat, as it has been said by John Spencer from West Point and many other experts. So under the auspices of this language, the most heinous accusations are leveled at Israel, and are basically serving the most evil regimes. It reminds me of the Moynihan principle by the late American ambassador to the UN, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, where he basically said that usually the countries that have the most accusations leveled against them regarding human rights are usually democracies, because these are the only ones that care. No one actually cares about human rights in Yemen, because we kind of know that they won't do anything. So it's very important not to fall into this fallacy, which I think is on steroids with regards to Israel and its conduct of the war.
Thank you, Atar Porat from the IDSF Research Department. It is always a great pleasure to speak with you, to learn from you. And just another thank you, because you actually produce a fantastic briefing once a week, a written summary of everything that's happened in this war. We share it in our IDSF newsletter. We put it out on our website. So if you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, make sure to subscribe so you can see all that Atar shares with us on a weekly basis. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.